Yo, what's good, ladies and gentlemen? What's good, ladies and gentlemen? We're gonna skip the intro tonight, and I don't know why I'm so blurry right now. I'm gonna try to fix my settings. Let me know if I'm clearing up a little bit. But anyhow, there's a lot going on when it comes to everything that's taking place in the energy extraction matrix. So the thing that I'm going to be discussing tonight is basically the cycle of the 13, and the cycle of the 13 is a representation of transformation. It's basically the frequency of recalibration, because from the years of 2030 to 2043, that is basically the 13th cycle that represents the unlocking of certain seals on the planet when you're talking about the activation of the seven thunders, right? Which creates a ecological humanitarian crisis that basically shakes up everything in the great majority of this matrix system. So we have to be very pretty, strategic, during this time period. And the reason I say that is because hold on for a second. All right. The reason why I say we have to be pretty much strategic, because there's a lot of stuff that's taking place when you're talking about the unaliving of David Wilcox. What they're trying to do right now is that they're trying to manipulate and compromise the message, because they know that the great majority of people on the planet are starting to wake up, at unstable heights. Because, in order to create this energy of a cosmic convergence, it's all about unity consciousness. Unity consciousness is the embodiment of the 144,000 frequency, right? So that's what full disclosure is all about. That is basically the unity consciousness creating this neurological apparatus that interfaces with the North Star Polaris, right? Which is basically the personification of the galactic center. So you got a lot of scientists coming up missing. You got a lot of people coming up being unalive, like David Wilcox. And then when it comes to me, they just recently demonetized my YouTube channel, right? I have no strikes, I have no violations. So this is why I'm saying they're trying to compromise the message, because they're trying to attack me from a financial standpoint. Because anytime you're speaking from the frequency of truth, you're going to be manipulated spiritually, physically, neurologically, financially, and emotionally, right? That's why I said this world is going to supplicate your emotions to the point where it transmutes into a form of a weakness. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to compromise my message, right? Right when I hit, 100,000 subscribers, literally that's when they demonetize my page. I have no strikes or no violations. Now you can say, it was because of an AI glitch or whatever, but I don't understand, how my page gets, pretty much caught up into that, because my page is not an AI page. My page is basically the embodiment of authenticity. I don't have inauthentic, content. Every time I come on my page, there's new topics. I show you new videos, and I show you new information. And then a lot of times I spin the block with old information and collaborated with the new information that that I basically demonstrated in the last video. So a lot of stuff that I'm going to be talking about tonight, is a part of the reason why they're basically trying to attack, the chosen ones from a financial standpoint, and from an energetic standpoint, and a physical standpoint. Because now, right now, in the simulation in real time, it's going to get harder. And being demonetized, that's a part of the, this is a part of the prophecy, right? It's a part of the prophecy. You know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where, you got to understand that when you're operating from a place of truth, they're going to attack you, right? Whether if they try to throw you in jail, whether if they try to attack your family members, you're going to be attacked from a financial standpoint, right? But, we're going to get into it. So if you want to support the channel still, like I said, there's my Cash App, and you also can support my book that's on Amazon. I got the link in the chat. The link is in the chat for my book, and I'm also working on my second book too, and I'm gonna release it on October of 2026. That's when I'm gonna release the publication, the second publication. And it's basically going to be during the timeline of what's taking place in between the years of 2030 all the way up until the year of 2043 when you're talking about the open vortex, because the open vortex in itself is also the representation of the activation of the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence is a part of the numerical systems of the universe. We finna get into it. So everybody put the rice bowls in the chat. And as you can see, like I said, man, they're trying to manipulate the numbers, because when you get demonetized, they're going to manipulate your algorithm. They're going to push you out of the algorithm, right? So that's why it's imperative, you know what I'm saying, to come to my page while it's demonetized, so you make sure y'all get these transmissions, because they're trying to destabilize the message, you know, as much as possible, right? So this is how they do it. So that they're trying to attack my page, because y'all know how many people that's always in my chat when I'm on here. Y'all already know how many people would be on here. So with that being said, we're not going to start the video yet. All right. Hold on for a second, guys. So first, we're going to get into the presentation. Everybody put the rice bowls in the chat. All right, here we go. Now, so when you're talking about the 13-year cycle, you're talking about the open vortex. The open vortex, where you have a restoration period that is based on spiritual transformation and spiritual metamorphosis by way of the activation of nature, which is the Netaruz. And the Netaruz is the personification of the Anunnaki, who is the Anunian Thurgi. When you understand the Cosmicon mythograph, which is the blueprint of the simulation, they are the ones who have the ability to reverse the energies of the simulation that was created by the dark forces of the archons when you get into the Gnostic text. So the 13 is in alignment with the Fibonacci sequence in nature, because it creates the spiral. The spiral in itself is a resurrection number, because it's the personification of the number 9. 9 is also a representation of completion. So when you're talking about the 9 and the 13, right? So from 2030, because during the time of 2030, that's when they want to create those sustainable development goals. When you're talking about the agenda for 2030, which is also in alignment with agenda 47. So now, when you're talking about the Fibonacci sequence, the 13 is also a 9, right? So the 13 is basically the gateway, but the 9 is also the path of the middle way that takes you right back to the galactic center when you have the activation of the 33, which is Christ consciousness. So when you look at the Fibonacci sequence, the 13 is also in alignment with 33, because they're basically interchangeable when you get into the esoterics of numerology. They're interchangeable. 13 is the divine feminine energy, which is a resurrection number, which is Isis, the personification of Isis. Isis is the true Jesus, right? So when you're looking at the 13, you're really, when you're talking about the Fibonacci sequence, so you're really looking at the number 9. The number 9 represents completion. 2043 is also the personification of completion, because 2 plus 0 plus 4 plus 3 equals 9. And that's in alignment with Dr. Malachi Z. York's publication when you're talking about El's Holy Injil, which is a transliteration of the book of Revelation, where he talks about the open vortex when you have the activation of the firmament opening up, because the God of the Bible was actually Yahweh, and Yahweh is actually the personification of Enlil. And Enlil is a personification of an archon that created the firmament. That's why God of the Bible is actually Satan, because Satan, he separated the intergalactic waters from the third dimension and created the firmament, which is basically a form of a spiritual cutoff. So during the time of 2043, that's when you're going to have the open vortex, which is basically a resurrection process. So now, when you also talking about the activation of the 13. So that's why in the Bible, they never speak of the number 13, because the number 13 is basically a metaphysical number that basically represents divine feminine energy. So that's why they skip it, because the Bible in itself is a patriarchal publication that is based on the astrological energies of the sun, that's in alignment with, Western mythology. So when you're talking about the lost years of Jesus from 12 to 30, right? because from 12 to 30, the reason they start at 12 and not at 13, because the 12 is basically in alignment with the dorsal vertebrae, right? So when you're talking about the years of Jesus, you're talking about Jacob's ladder. This is basically a resurrection process, right? This is why they skip the number 13 and go to 12, because they want to skip the energy of resurrection, and they don't want you to know that it's acclimated to a divine feminine matriarchal energy, right? So the lost years of Jesus from 12 to 30, because when he came back at 30, that's when he had, he became that messianic figure from 30 to 33. So this is also in alignment, like I said, with your spinal column, which is basically Jacob's ladder, which is basically the seven energy cortexes, when it's basically in alignment with the journey of the mystical initiation. So this is an initiation period. So spiritually, I guess you could say, for a lot of people who's putting out a lot of truth, this could be your initiation period, from the angelic realms, to make sure you're initiated in the higher realms to the point where you're able to extract information when you're going through a compromising state. So just like, a lot of people, like I said, you're going to get compromised from a financial standpoint, energetic standpoint, physical standpoint. You're going to be compromised. So this realm is going to, take you through a form of degradation to make sure you're going to be able to reach those states of mastery. So the same thing translates when you're talking about the spinal column, right? So the importance of the 33, because like I said, the 33 in the esoterics of numerology, the 33 and the 13 are basically interchangeable, right? So that's why they skip it in the Bible. They skip the number 13 and they go to 12 to 30, because it's talking about the vertebrae, right? Jacob's ladder, to where you, like I said, to where you're in a degraded state, where you're basically in an afflictive state, your lower self, as you go right back to the galactic center. The galactic center is also a representation of when you have the spiritual sun outside the firmament, is basically the epitome of the galactic center, which is the North Star. That's why Kanye West, he brought his daughter on stage when he was on top of the earth, because North represents the North Star. And then you got the Ursa Major and Ursa Minor star constellation that is also equated to the bear, right? All this is nothing but symbolism. Symbolism that's basically in alignment with westernized monotheistic religion, which is also in alignment with Freemasonic symbolism. You got to understand symbolisms from all spectrums in order to galvanize the information. And also, yes, 13 is also a representation of Ophiuchus, because Ophiuchus, according to the 13 zodiac wheel, is basically the embodiment of equilibrium, because the 13 zodiac wheel represents um, Jesus walking on water, which is the spinal column. Jesus walking on water is the spinal column, which is a representation of the snake. But the snake is also a piano, and those piano keys is acclimated to the ridges on the vertebrae, to where you're basically in tune with a certain frequency of instrumentation that's basically interfacing with the cosmos, which is basically the North Star, like I was basically demonstrating, the true spiritual sun that's outside the dome. The true spiritual sun outside the dome is a resurrection of energy that represents the 13, that's interchangeable with the number 33, right? So that's why, and when you get into the esoterics of the Masonic Temple, it tells you that there shall ye find light, because at the top of the pillar, which is the North Star, the true spiritual sun that operates off fractions of light, that gives illuminations to the two celestial bodies inside the firmament, which is the sun and the moon. Now, a lot of people are not ready for this information. The sun is also a artificial celestial megastructure, right? That is not the real sun. The real sun is outside the firmament. You're forgetting that everything within the infrastructure of the firmament is fake. Everything in the simulation is fake, right? That's when you got to understand that the North Star in itself represents an interface transition that manipulates time and space, which creates mechos, right? And what is a mecho? A mecho is a magnetospheric, externally collapsing object that takes you to a different space and time. The sun and our moon cannot take you to a different space and time. Those two celestial bodies, right? The sun is essentially a a celestial body that is for ascension, and the moon is a celestial body that's for reincarnation. That is the only diametrical difference. The real sun is outside the firmament. That's why they work so hard to keep you stuck on this planet. That's why they work so hard to keep you outside of yourself. Everything they want you to worship everything inside the firmament. That's what makes you an antichrist. You are anti yourself. This kind of like the same concept, in the movie Last Dragon, when Bruce Leroy, when he was in looking for the some dumb goy, he was looking for the master. He came up on a fortune cookie machine. This whole time he was looking for the master, and he thought it was a fortune cookie machine when he was the master the whole time. So it's one of those things, like I said, in order to find the light, just like they say in the Masonic temples, that means that you got to find your motherfucking self. You got to find yourself. How you going to be your higher self? You don't know who you are. You don't know where you came from. You don't know your history. How you going to, how you going to find the light and you following the the negative implications that's coming from the energy extraction matrix? How you following indoctrination programs? You're not going to find the light. You're going to look for light that's outside of yourself, right? So that's why it don't matter whatever monotheistic belief system that you follow is basically in alignment with the orders of Freemasonry. So it don't matter if you studying Islam. It doesn't matter if you're studying whatever, uh, Catholicism, whatever. All of it's basically in alignment with the energy extraction matrix because it's basically the embodiment of the false light. The false light is everything in the simulation, the sun and the moon, and everything around you as far as people, places, and possessions. All this is nothing but an illusion. But when you get outside the firmament, that's when you reap the benefits of true enlightenment. Because, like I said, the 13 in itself is a representation of the gateway, but 33 is the personification of mastery, right? Because, like I said, you got to go from neophyte, adept, to master. The G in itself is a representation of gnosis and Freemasonry. But the G in itself is also the personification of sacred geometry because the Geo in G represents Ki, which is Chi. So that means that your mitochondrial DNA has to, reap the benefits of the energies of mastery once you open up the galactic center, which is the gateway. The gateway is to get right back to the North Star Polaris, which is Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus is the representation of the 13. The 13 represents a woman, not a man, right? That is the diametrical difference. See, the 13 represents the gateway, which is the woman, which is also the personification of the woman's legs opening up, the gateway portal, right? Because the tree of knowledge and the tree of wisdom is really inside the woman's womb, right? Because the woman is connected to the mycelium network of nature. She's connected to the planetary systems when you're talking about the Fibonacci sequence of nature that basically interfaces with the North Star Polaris, right? That's what you got to understand. See, the number 33, yeah, this is a matriarchal number because it's talking about a man. It's talking about a Masonic figure, right? But like I said, in order to reap the benefits of mastery, you got to go through the gateway first, right? If you ain't got the keys to open up the motherfucking gate, there is no mastery, right? And what is the keys to the gate? The keys in the gate is Jack and Boaz, these two pillars, which represents the sun and the moon, right? Golden key, silver key. You got to unlock these keys, these legs, just like when you bring in, when you was in your wild days, when you bring in a woman home from the bar in order to, unlock, open up that yoni portal, you got to make her feel relaxed. You got to make her open up. Right. So the same thing translates when you're talking about, when you're looking at this Masonic tracing board, because like I said, that's how you reach the apex of mastery. So that basically tells you that, all this is basically in alignment with metaphysical sex, which when you're talking about DNA and alignments and things of that nature. Now, so again, like I said, man, you push this video in the algorithm because, like I said, they're gonna mess up the numbers. That they demonetize my page, so it's not gonna push certain videos in the algorithm. So you gotta understand that because, like I said, they're going to subjugate the message at all costs. They're going to subjugate the message. It's a part of the program. Anybody who is walking this energy of truth, you know what I'm saying? You're going to deal with shadow banning. You're going to deal with death threats. You're going to deal with a lot of things. So, like I said, these are one of the videos that you want to share in the algorithm, right? Because if I wasn't close, I must have said something because I find it funny that they demonetized my page right after I showed y'all who the black nobility was in that reset, the great reset live that I did, the last one I did, the one that was before the interview. So that's why I said they're going to compromise the message because they know that I understand their symbolism. And I know that, young Pharaoh, he went through the same situation. I think they demonetized young Pharaoh like 3 times. They demonetized him, gave him his stuff back, demonetized him. Because like I said, when you walk in this energy of truth, they're going to hit you from every level, right? That's why I said you got to keep your vibration high. You got to keep your motherfucking vibration so strong, so much to the point where they cannot penetrate your cipher, right? So that's why I said you got to stand on your square as much as possible. So that's why everything as far as like in the Freemasonics, the 33 is interchangeable with the 13 because the number 13 is connected to the numerical sequence of the Fibonacci sequence, which is basically the numerical components that basically interfaces with the North Star Polaris, which is the true spiritual sun of the universe, right? So that's why I said, everything they do is basically symbolism. While at the same time, remember, I told you on April 6th of this year, when you had the Leo star constellation was in alignment with the Sphinx, and that alignment happens every 24,000 years. It was in alignment with the star Regulus was in alignment with the Sphinx. That's what created the resurrection of the matriarchal energy. So now in real time, because of that algorithm, now you got Spirit Airlines shuts down after 33 years. 33. So they're basically telling you that the spirit of your so-called Jesus, the spirit of Jesus is in the ethers right now, right? So it's not really the spirit of Jesus. It's really the activation of neutrinos that is extracted from the North Star Polaris that basically interfaces with the sun inside the firmament. That's what's basically happened. So when you're talking about Spirit Airlines shutting down at 33, you're really talking about the resurrection of divine feminine energy, which is the 13. That's what they're basically telling you in real time if you understand their symbolism. If you don't understand symbolism by now, shit, I can't explain nothing more advanced than the weather to you, right? Because like I said, symbolism is going to be their downfall. You got to be able to read the room. You got to have some type of social awareness, right? You got to understand that everything in a simulation operates on binary code. And the great majority of these words and these energies that's interfacing with binary code is being ran on the dark side of the moon. So that means that everything in a simulation is not a coincidence. It's a mathematical equation. Everything is a mathematical equation. Everybody put the motherfucking rice bowls in the chat. I can talk how I want to talk now because I ain't monetized. So, we gonna keep it, we gonna try to keep it clean because I'm gonna try to repeal my stuff. But like I said, I know they're gonna attack me from a financial standpoint because they know that they can't attack me from a sexual standpoint and they can't attack me from a neurological standpoint. They know that my mental health is in order. They know I come from a good family. So what's the only way you can compromise me, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm not the type of person that's gonna fall victim to some pussy. If you know what I'm saying, if you're gonna compromise me, you know what I'm saying, you better hit me where it hurts. I tell you that much because, like I said, it's going to take it'll take a lot. I'm talking about it extremely a lot. I'm talking about like 800 different lifetimes in order, you know what I'm saying, for me to compromise my message. So that's how we ain't living in the time right now. But I got off track a little bit. But the 13 represents the crown, which is Kether. And the Kether is basically in alignment with your higher self, which is the Shakti energy, which is a representation of mastery once you get through the pillars of the gateway to find the true light, right? That's why the G is basically a representation of the North Star. You get to the North Star by going through the woman's womb, divine feminine energy, right? But they try to tell you that you can get true enlightenment. You can get right back to God if you read a motherfucking Bible or a Holy Quran. They tell you can get right back to God when it comes to that, but they ain't gonna tell you that you can get right back to God when you go through the divine feminine energies of nature, or just simply harmonizing with the divine feminine energy when you're talking about the woman that harmonizes on a certain frequency. Because you got to have a woman that's in tune with nature, right? So so every stuff, all this stuff is basically in alignment. When you're talking about the royal arc, the royal arc is the embodiment of Goma Ars Dabar, which is wisdom, strength, and beauty. Wisdom, strength, and beauty is basically the blueprint for God. Wisdom, strength, and beauty is the blueprint for God, because eyes, when you get into the esoterics, it basically translates to uh strength translates to eyes. And the eyes in itself of strength takes you right back to the galactic center, right? This is the royal arc in Freemasonry, because beauty and wisdom represent the pillars of severity and mercy, the sun and the moon. But strength in itself is coming from the North Star Polaris that's outside the dome, right? They show you this in Freemasonry, but this also represents the 13. And this is also in alignment with the Wizard of Oz, because in order to meet the eyes, you got to follow the path of the middle way. That's why the strength is in alignment with eyes, is in the middle. The path of the middle way is the yellow brick road, right? Follow the motherfucking yellow brick road, and that's how you reach your Christ consciousness, in so many words, right? Because the yellow brick road is basically the steps of Freemasonry when you're talking about Jacob's ladder. Jacob's ladder that takes you right back to the crown to find the light outside the firmament, right back to the galactic center, which is the North Star, which is Ophiuchus, the 13, right? That's what you got going on. So that's why in their systems of control and their secret societies, what they do is they create an inversion. So the Black Sabbath was formed on Friday the 13th in 1969, a Saturnian omen. Friday is the day of Venus, beauty, harmony, and love. The polar opposite of Venus is Saturn, which rules restriction, death, and karma. So what they did was they inverted the frequencies of the 13. They inverted the frequencies of the divine feminine energy, right? Because like I said, 13 represents resurrection. There is no death frequency on the number 13. There is no death energy or anything that's connected to a bad day or omen that's acclimated to the 13. That's what they want you to believe, right? Because the 13 in itself is in alignment with the 13 moon cycles a year. It's in alignment with the sun plus the 12 zodiac houses, which is basically Jesus amalgamated with the 12 apostles, which is also the personification of the 13. And then you got 13 stripes on the the eagle crest of the United States American dollar. Then you got the 13 arrows, the 13 leaves. But like I said, all they do is invert the everything by way of draconian magic. Draconian magic that's basically interfacing with the tetragrammaton, because they added the 13, which is basically in alignment with Jehovah or Yahweh, right? Jehovah or Yahweh or Yahweh, or which is basically YHWH. So Yahweh interfacing with the corporation is what created the 26. They added another 13 to basically subjugate the matriarchy with corporations that is controlled by the United States government and Israel, right? That is how they inverted the dualistic trine of the hexa alpha. That's how they inverted everything. So the 13 is they added another 13, because the 13 equals the 26, and the 26 in itself is a representation of Israel and the United States government amalgamating to create these corporations. So that's how you know that the system in itself is being ruled by the energy of Yahweh, who is Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth is Chronos, and Chronos is the one who controls the simulation. So that's why when you get into the esoterics, it tells you that Yahweh is the God of Canaan. So the gods and goddesses of Canaan. Yahweh is the gods and goddesses of Canaan. Tells you right there. God of the Bible is Yahweh. Yahweh, When you go to the Tetragrammaton, it means agreeable and disagreeable. When you break down the etymology of the word Enlil, it means Lord of the sky. Satan was the what? The prince of air. So Yahweh, Enlil, Satan, they're basically the same thing. So that's why I said all they do is basically a representation is a representation of inversion. Everything is an inverted frequency, right? Because that's what Shaitan does. Shaitan is in alignment with the Canaanite bloodline, which is the Amorite. The Amorite is also the Tamahu. The Tamahu that is basically extrapolated in ancient Kemetic spirituality. So Shaitan, the Tamahu, the Amorite, the Girgashite, the Canaanite, every goddamn night, Hamite, they're basically in alignment with the energy of Shaitan. It's the same entity, same bloodline, right? The same bloodline that created another 13 to invert the true matriarchal energy of the 13, which is, you know, interfacing with nature. So this is how you, when you get into the bloodlines, right? So the Amorites, the Girgashites, the cursed seed of Ham, when you go to the book of Leviticus, all these are nothing but the cursed bloodlines. They created these secret societies to manipulate the cosmic energy of the 13, which is the gateway, right? So this is what patriarchy basically did. Patriarchy is basically the golden, look, just imagine a mansion, just imagine a big ass mansion with these nice golden gates. Nice golden gates. They, you know, they got supreme security around. You can't nobody get through the gates. But what patriarchy did, the Canaanite, Shaitan, what they did, they put graffiti all over the gates. They killed the security guards and they opened up the gates and basically inverted everything and created Freemasonry. They inverted everything. That's all it is. That's what a devil is. Devil, you know what I'm saying? It lives spelled backwards is devil. So that means that their systems of control is to make you live backwards, which makes you a devil, which makes you an antichrist. This is why you cannot reach the energies of the true light, right? Everything is based on inversion. So that's why the 13th chapter of the book of Revelations mentions the Antichrist and the beast. It is prophesied that the Antichrist will rise from the west. In 13th Psalms, it states that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Now, the reason why they say that is because when you get into ancient Kemetic spirituality, the pineal gland is not the seat of the soul. It's the heart. The heart is the seat of the soul. But that's a whole different, transmission. So when you're talking about the Antichrist and the beast and things of that nature, you're talking about a corporation. You're talking about a conglomerate corporation that is being ran by the hybrid Albion European. That's basically coming from the royal family. So this is why the royal family, they're basically giving their kingdom to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is transmuting that kingdom to the restoration of the matriarch, right? The royals are giving their kingdom to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is giving it back to the indigenous people. That's what you're seeing in real time. He's not doing it because he wants to. He's doing it because he has to, right? You cannot have a democracy in the sun cycle. Everything has to reap the benefits of the energy of a republic, because a republic is a matriarch, and a matriarch is the law of the land, which is common law, which is tribal law that belongs to the indigenous people, which is the autochthonous people, right? The autochthonous people is the indigenous people. That's why Donald Trump, that's why this came out in the news. Trump will keep bail gifted by in Oval Office, right? And who's to say that that motherfucking bell is not the bell to unravel the energies that basically, makes the draconian reptilians reveal themselves? Who's to say? Because one thing you got to understand, that Trump is also a trumpet, and a trumpet casts out a frequency broadcast that manipulates our reality, and he does that every day, based on what he talks about. Now, we're gonna get into a video here. Put the rice bowls in the chat, because, like I said, they're gonna try to manipulate my information as much as possible. You gotta understand that they're gonna try to manipulate and invert my information as much as possible. Because, like I said, it should be more people in here. It should be about 2,000 people in here, by now. But like I said, they're gonna stop my videos from trying to, reach the algorithm. right? Due to the fact that I'm not monetized no more. So I'm gonna play this video for you guys.
To theories of nuclear testing or even UFOs, because
hold on for a second. All right.
President Trump said this.
Do you have an update on the UFO files and when we're going to be seeing them?
Well, I think we're going to be releasing as much as we can in the near future. They want to find out about the UFOs and anything having to do with UFO or related material, and we're going to be releasing a lot of things that we have, and I think some of it's going to be very interesting.
Well, did the Air Force create the stories about alien technology being stashed and tested at Area 51? A major newspaper says the whole thing was made up by the Air Force in order to mislead the American public and our adversaries.
Now, the release of a new documentary film has stirred up renewed interest in Area 51 lore. And the big question, was it all propaganda?
8 News Now Chief Investigator George Knapp joining us here in the studio with more.
You can guess where I am on this. This new version of what happened 37 years ago was published in the Wall Street Journal, a highly respected newspaper. But is it true? Those who were present when the story exploded back in 1989 think the Air Force is engaged in a form of reverse engineering, that is, rewriting history.
So are these earthquakes just a version of burning the files at an embassy when people got to get out?
Well, the thing that lights up in my mind is that back in the 1990s, I briefed a man who worked and designed a security apparatus at some of the facilities out there, particularly the ones up near Groom Lake and Pahut Mesa. And he explained that on the top of those complexes underground were like bunker busting type bombs, but underneath them were thermonuclear devices. So that if
now I need you to understand something. Now, a lot of the stuff that's going on when you're talking about a lot of these earthquakes that's going on in Area 51, you also just had the activation of the New Madrid fault line, also down in the Cascadian subduction zone, and also in the areas of California when you're talking about the big one. Because one thing you also got to understand that they have earthquake devices underneath the ground that Alex Collier was talking about in the 1960s, the 70s, and the 80s. So you have earthquake machines. Now, this is also something that the 13th scientist was also talking about when you're talking about the ultra-terrestrials, because the great majority of these ultra-terrestrials, they actually live underground, right? They live underground. So it can be some type of draconian technology that could, activate, these big earthquakes, right? Because like I said, they talk about, a lot of this, aerodynamic technology that's underground. So a lot of this information, is in alignment with those 13 scientists that came up missing, which is also in alignment with, UFOologist David Wilcox, who also talked about the ultra-terrestrials, right? And also, mind you, the same night that David Wilcox, the same night that he was unalive, that is the same night they demonetized me, which is kind of, weird, but, it just seems like they're trying to attack certain individuals from different, standpoints, because you can't just unalive, every truth speaker. You can't just do that. You might do this, unalive this one, mess with this one financially, do some energetic frequency warfare on that person's mind to make people attack him. Like, there's different ways on how they attack certain people based on who you are from a characteristic standpoint, right? They know that I'm not going to unalive myself, so this is why they got to hit people from different, they got to hit you according to your attributes, because they know who you are. They watch you every day on your camera, on your TV, your phone. They know everything that you do. They know how to compromise you, right? They know how to compromise you. Big Brother is always watching.
if anybody was getting close to those facilities, and by this, it could even be the legal government of the United States, they could collapse those facilities. No, I don't know that that's what happened, but I know for a fact those security systems are out there. So that's one consideration. Now, it could just be a cluster of earthquakes, or they could be doing some legitimate underground testing out in that region.
Yeah, there are a lot of mountains out there, so earthquakes are not out of the question.
And a sudden burst of seismic activity near one of the world's most secretive military sites is raising new speculation. This is also triggering conspiracy theories about the covert nuclear testing. At least 17 earthquakes have struck near the highly classified Area 51 in Nevada within just 20.
And mind you, remember, they got that United States Capitol Tower building in LA, right? And Larry Silverstein, remember that name Stein, Goldstein, Silverstein, Weinstein, Epstein, all those names that got the Stein is an Albion hybrid European, the Ashkenazi Jew. Because the Stein, when you look at the nomenclature title for the Stein, the suffix of the word, the last word comes from the Yiddish language, right? Because Stein is also equated to stone. So that's why they, the great majority of the Ashkenazi Jews, they are the ones who created BlackRock. Because everything in the simulation is a personification of the stone that interfaces with the subatomic particles, which created the magnetospheric holographic matrix, right? That is the bloodline that controls the simulation, right? So that's why you got to understand everything in as far as like words, nomenclature titles, surnames, all this is for a reason, right? Because all of this stuff has a gematria code. All of it has a binary code. Everything in a simulation is a mathematical equation. But you got to understand the symbolism that interfaces with the mathematical equation and collaborate it with your imagination, right? You got to have an imagination. What's used for information if you don't have an imagination? If you cannot imagine the motherfucking shit that you're talking about, right? Because your imagination is how you manipulate timelines, right? You got to be able to see what you're talking about, because that's how it's able to interface with the ethers and be able to create this energy of manifestation, right? But I'm gonna kind of drifted off a little bit, but I'm gonna keep the video going. Put the rice bowls in the chat. Illuminati, we on to you. We on to you.
The area is also located close to the Nevada test site, where the U.S. conducted nuclear weapons tests from 1951 until 1992. The tremors ranged between magnitudes 2.5 and 4.4, with the strongest quake originating about 4 kilometers beneath the surface. According to U.S. Geological Survey data, more than 100 people reported feeling the earthquake. The location of the largest quake is rather unusual. Geophysicists point out that the tremor occurred in a relatively shallow area where such activity is not commonly recorded. While they believe the earthquakes are most likely natural, they also said that some aspects of the seismic readings remain unclear.
Alina Dangerfield is in Silver Springs, where she was able to speak to some of the residents there who have been feeling the shaking now for upwards of a month, obviously, with all of these aftershocks. We hear the reaction here in the newsroom with people calling in, emailing. What are the residents who are feeling this the most saying there, Alina?
Really, most of them are just a little bit worried about what it will do to their homes and businesses if the quakes continue. But they've kind of gotten used to it. It's become a little bit of a fact of life for them, but that's not to say that it isn't worrisome.
The big one hit, it's like, okay, is that all we're getting? And then we get hit with the other one. It's like, okay, let me listen. Is anything?
But yeah, back to what I was saying, that big one earthquake, Larry Silverstein, who bought the United States Capitol Tower building, I think that's in an area of the San Andreas fault line. And Larry Silverstein, the same person who purchased the buildings for 9/11, that man is also the same man who purchased the United States Capitol Tower building. And they've been getting a lot of threats in LA, drone strike threats that's coming from Iran. So they can, possibly, have some type of controlled demolition under the ground, right? Controlled demolition under the ground to activate the fault line to where you have the big one earthquake, and then blame it on Iran, and then try to say it was some type of invasion. Maybe that's what the 13 scientists, talking about. And you notice the number 13 scientists, right? What if that, what if that's actually, what's going on? What if these ultra-terrestrials have a detonation demolition system to where they can create earthquakes underground to create chaos on the planet, the Great Reset, and then blame it on Iran? That could be one of the things too, because like I said, A lot of the scientists, they had information about these extraterrestrials that basically lived underground. And I'm going to be talking about that when we go into James Goldstein, right? We're going to talk about that as we get through the transmission, but I'm going to keep playing this video.
Falling off. Nothing's falling off. We're okay.
Audra Borders and many other Silver Springs residents were woken up at 1:17 a.m. to at least 2 earthquakes on Friday, measuring at 4.3 and 5.2 magnitudes. Those are only 2 of more than 1,000 quakes that have hit the area in the last month.
They've been crazy. The first one that happened, like I said, I was standing outside and I was walking home and I had to stop for a second because I almost fell over and I could see the ground moving like in waves.
The northern Nevada town is mostly undamaged, but some folks are starting to see cracks and are worried about the damage more earthquakes could do.
Rest of them really rattled our trailer pretty bad, and I do got a split on the side of my trailer where it just kind of split my slide out. And so I'm kind of concerned about that. If we have any more, I'm probably going to end up losing my slide out.
All 3 of these residents say they're worried that an even larger quake might hit.
I'm still kind of waiting for like the earth to split open or something, you know, like end times, I guess.
We don't have this activity so much. We have it, but not like we have for this past month. This has been pretty wild, so I'm pretty concerned.
This is precursor to something larger coming, because those plates.
Remember, the big one can be activated at any time, because also when you activate the big one, when you have this controlled demolition underground that creates these earthquakes and, you know, have the movement of tectonic plates that's going to create sedimentary rock formation, when that happens, you know what happens after that? That's when Donald Trump, who has qualified immunity, he can activate martial law. And that's when he can activate FEMA. That's why you got FEMA troops out in California right now. That's why you've been getting a lot of stuff talking about the Red Cross Foundation. All this is preparing for the good one. I mean, for the big one, right? So like I said, controlled demolition, an earthquake machine underground that is controlled by ultra-terrestrials who are draconian reptilian. They hit that button, activate that fault line. All California splits off and go into the ocean, and then they blame it on Iran, China, or Russia. And then that's when you're going to have the start of the New World Order, World War III, Great Reset. That's going to begin the beginning points of it. So that's why I said 2030 to 2043 this is a prevalent time period, because this represents the 13th cycle, right? 2030 to 2043, because that's when you're going to have the open vortex. That's the real reset. The real reset that's going to be created by nature is in 2043, but they trying to create their own reset by 2030. That's the diametrical difference. That's the difference between a reset that's being caused by the elite and the archonic forces, and then a reset that's being caused by the benevolent faction of the Elohim, which is the Anunnaki, that interfaces with the indigenous people. We're going to cause the reset by way of the activation of nature, but they're trying to cause their reset with technology and draconian magic and things of that nature. That's the difference. That's the difference.
Are going to continue to push against each other, and it's just a matter of time before we have another San Francisco or another LA.
Well, that hasn't been
then also you also cannot negate the fact that in San Francisco you got the Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate is the golden yellow brick road. The Golden Gate creates the Royal Arc, right? The Royal Arc, which is also equated to the 88. And 88 is also in alignment with the 9/11 event. So this is all these numbers and everything in gematria basically lines the fuck up. All of it basically lines up in real time. But they don't want you to know that, right? Because like I said, the Golden Gate represents the gateway to 13. All this, everything that I've been showing y'all basically, checks out in real time. Everything that I've been showing y'all. That's why, I keep the receipts on deck, right? The 13 represents the gateway. The gateway is the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate to start the big one. The big one, because whatever's going to be taking place, in order to, to create the reset, is going to be taking place in California first, because that's where they want to build the smart cities. They want to build the smart cities before the year of 2028. That's why they're trying to make us, the great majority of humans, interface with biometric artificial intelligence technology. That is the reason why. That's why they want you to interface with everything as far as like transhumanism by 2028. That's when they want to build the smart cities, and they want to build them in LA first, or California, right? And then you have a draconian reptilian catacombs underground in LA. All right, I'm gonna keep playing the video.
Confirmed by experts, it doesn't stop the people of Silver Springs from worrying and preparing. And again, the Nevada Seismology Lab can't confirm or know for sure if a large earthquake will hit here in the same area, but they do encourage residents to be aware that aftershocks will likely come.
The earthquakes have
like I said, they at least you can do on my channel, man, get the likes up and hit the subscribe button, because like I said, my page is demonetized, so the least you can do is just subscribe, make sure the videos get out, because like I said, whether if I'm monetized or not, the truth is still gonna come out, and I want these videos to get out. So get the videos out.
Reignited long-standing conspiracy theories back on social media surrounding Area 51. Now, Area 51 is a highly classified U.S. Air Force military installation located at Groom Lake in southern Nevada for flight testing. The year 2013, after decades of secrecy.
See, they noticed, like I said, talking about 2030. I'm gonna go back a little bit.
Now, Area 51 is a highly classified U.S. Air Force military installation located at Groom Lake in southern Nevada for flight testing. The year 2013, after decades of secrecy. The timing of these earthquakes also comes at a time when speculation about a series of American scientists who have died or gone missing in recent years has been garnering attention. Some of the scientists have been linked to secretive scientific research, including those on nuclear weapons.
For nearly 40 years, the family which owns the tiny desert outpost formerly known as the Rachel Bar and Grill has openly embraced the now familiar lore about exotic, possibly alien technology being tested at Area 51, the world's best-known, supposedly secret military base. The town of Rachel and its now famous watering hole are the closest stopovers to the Groom Lake base.
Thank you.
And base workers are a core clientele. In late 1989, the owners, Joe and Pat Travis, came up with a new theme and new name for their struggling business.
The Alien. Yeah, Alien,
The late Joe Travis saw the change as a slam dunk marketing opportunity.
It's been fantastic for us.
A way to capitalize on the new flow of visitors drawn to Rachel by stories of alien tech being tested inside the forbidden zone of Area 51. Public interest exploded starting in May 1989 when KLAS aired an interview with an anonymous former government employee who told an outrageous story.
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin.
Within days of that interview, curious people began flocking to the outskirts of Area 51 to watch the skies. Within months, tour buses filled with scores of the UFO curious poured into the desert.
This is a classic mothership appearance.
And when the identity of the whistleblower, Bob Lazar, was revealed in November 1989, public interest went into the stratosphere. Media from all over the world beat a path to Area 51's door. Every day since then, aviation watchers and UFO believers have staked out vantage points to watch the skies over Groom Lake for whatever might be flying, of earthly origin or not. For Area 51 security, it's been a nightmare. A huge array of cameras and sensors had to be installed around the perimeter.
You'll see it's clearly marked U.S. government property.
The so-called camo dudes had to be positioned 24/7 at every possible entry point to handle the hordes who foolishly tried to slip in. Things grew even more complicated when the state of Nevada dedicated the world's first extraterrestrial highway. The local baseball team was renamed the 51s. Countless products such as posters, t-shirts, trinkets, rock bands, and video games were launched. And the once...
You see as far as they go when it comes to disclosure, they willing to give it to you in the form of entertainment. They done change baseball teams, stores. You think they do all that shit for no reason? They got to give you the truth, you know what I'm saying, in the form of entertainment because they're telling you the truth in real time.
Secret base became known all over the world via books, TV shows, and blockbuster movies.
It ain't on a map. Trust me, it's there.
Eventually, the notoriety caused even bigger headaches for the base when thousands gathered in 2019 with the stated intention to storm Area 51 all at once. Did all of this chaos and irritation happen on purpose? That's an allegation reported recently by the Wall Street Journal. The story alleges that an unnamed Air Force officer on an unknown date created the UFO myth by handing over fake UFO photos to the owners of an unspecified bar near the base. There's only one, and it does have a wall with assorted photos. The plan was to confuse the public and eventually discourage people from paying attention to what was really being flown out of Groom Lake. At the time, most notably, the F-117 stealth fighter. The owners of the bar in question think the tall tale is laughable.
You know, it's possible somebody came out with fake photos and gave them to you.
Yeah,
that isn't why you made the change in the name and it changed it. Yeah.
F-117 was no secret to folks in rural Nevada. They'd seen it flying many times, along with other more exotic objects in the sky. The existence of that plane had been reported by KLAS and other media as far back as the early 80s. UFO sightings over Nevada date back to the 1940s. If the Air Force plan was to use fake UFO photos...
And that was also during the time of the Roswell crash, and that's where you got the great majority of your night vision technology came from the Roswell crash, actually. So the night vision technology that they have inside the military, it came from the Roswell crash. The great majority of, a lot of the technology that we got come from, a lot of these ultra-terrestrials that the scientists were talking about.
To confuse or discourage further interest in real Area 51 projects, it was a miserable failure and had the exact opposite effect.
So we're going to tell people we're testing alien technology instead. How'd that work out?
Yeah, that did a really good job. But, that doesn't make sense.
Remember, years ago, they wrote you and I off as kooks because we would just talk about this.
But we just heard President Trump promising disclosure. Mm-hmm. What does disclosure actually mean in your mind?
Well, I founded the disclosure movement at 25 years ago at the National Press Club event where we had 20 top secret military and government people disclose their information. We're going to do another one on May 8th coming up a week from Friday. And what we have found is that the government, meaning the constitutional...
Like I said, whether you believe this or not, draconian reptilians are real. Otherwise, what's the point of disclosure? What is the point of it? If none of this stuff was real, what is the point of it? So it's not about if extraterrestrials are real. We also have the technology to create entities, right? A lot of these entities, when you're talking about the cryptids, which are basically the 72 demons of Goetia, which are basically Nephilim, fallen angels, they live in Nightmare Hall. They live in the cavern systems under the earth. It's kind of like the same concept of the movie Cabin in the Woods. They had different chambers where they had different entities, and they come to the surface on the planet, and a lot of them, they show up in national parks. And I told y'all about that like 2 years ago. So a lot of these entities or whatever, because national parks are basically, it's an interstellar vortex portal where every national park that takes you to different dimensional kingdoms that are basically subterranean, right? All the great majority of national parks lead to subterranean draconian kingdoms, which is a draconian catacombs. We're going to get into that, as we get through the transmission, because it's basically in alignment with the video that I put out today on my Instagram page. So if you haven't checked out the video I put on my Instagram, check that out.
Government was pretty much left out of the loop on this beginning in the late 1950s. And this is why when I spoke to President Trump's former national security advisor from his first term, they were never briefed on this. And I found this to be true all across government, both here and abroad. And yet the evidence is overwhelming that we're not alone, that there's a lot being kept secret. But the center of gravity of it is not in the government, it's in the corporations. My uncle spent his whole career with Northrop Grumman, so the large aerospace corporations are holding most of these secrets and run most of those facilities.
Why do you think they're holding the secrets? Is it because they just don't want us to freak out? Like, what's the purpose of keeping it all behind closed doors, whether it's the government or a corporation that's a private company?
Well, I think there are two main reasons. The first is that the technologies of how those operate was figured out in the mid 1950s, what are called electromagnetic-gravitic systems or anti-gravity. The energy source is from the quantum vacuum or 0 point. We don't have time to go into that. And those being disclosed would eventually replace all oil, gas, coal in the world, and would also give us a completely cleaned environment, but also in poverty globally. And so there's been this debate for decades of when does this come out? When do we acknowledge these? Because there's no way you can acknowledge they're real and that there's been a reverse engineering program that's gone on for over 70 or 80 years and then say there's nothing that's come of that. I mean, the most brilliant scientific minds I've ever met work in covert programs related to this technology.
Mm-hmm. So we've been covering this story on the show and on the network. There's been this disappearance or deaths surrounding 12 or more scientists or people who work closely to government secrets, who had highly classified clearances, just walking into the desert, on a hike, disappearing with no trace. Based on what you've seen in the backgrounds of each of these different people on your screen, do you think that they're related in any way?
So with that being said, they're doing a lot of silencing when it comes to the information. So especially when it comes to, my page, like I said, they demonetized my page. And, I have no strikes. I have no violations on my page. So they're trying to find a way to compromise the message. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to compromise the message in real time because, like I said, it's one of those things like, if you're not able to be compromised, like I said, they're going to try to hit you from all levels. And it's a part of, the journey when you're trying to put out this truth is a part of the, the prophecy. So we're going to get back to the transmission. Everybody put the rice bowls in the chat. Malachi, turn that TV off. Because it's showing kind of looking like I'm breaking up a little bit on my end. All right. But anyhow, we back to the transmission. Now. So what that was basically demonstrating, it was talking about, America's, the most volatile fault line overdue for an earthquake that could devastate millions, the tectonic time bomb, right? So this is basically talking about the big one. This is talking about the big one, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody put the rice bowls in the chat because we're cooking up the esoteric knowledge. And then you had in 1995, you had Phil Schneider claimed the government invented a earthquake device citing Kobe in 1989, San Francisco quakes. He's soon found to be dead with a piano wire around his neck. And then it said, yes, Phil Schneider was given a presentation in 1995 where he said the federal government has now invented a earthquake device. I am a geologist and I know what I'm talking about. So geologists, astrophysicists, particle physicists, people like this be coming up missing. So you got with the Kobe earthquake in Japan, there was no post wave, as in no normal quake, none. 1989. So also it could be also one of these things, because like I said, everything that's taking place, like as far as like these scientists or whatever. What if these scientists are not coming up missing? What if these scientists are being kidnapped to go underground to be able to activate some of this extraterrestrial technology to cause the reset? That's another thing too, right? Because what if these ultra-terrestrials are basically like just the elites who are just underground, who control elites on the surface? I mean, there's different ways to look at it. There's many different ways to look at it. So there is an earthquake machine, right? And then, like I said, they want to cause destruction by the year of 2000, especially around the time of 2027, because that's going to create the great separation. You're going to have those who's going to separate from the system, and you're going to have those that's going to conform to the system, and the conformity is going to be conforming to the biometric system of artificial intelligence, which is a new law that will require all United States vehicles to have constant driver surveillance technology by the year of 2027. So the driver monitoring technology will be the standard in all United States vehicles. So, like I said, that's what it is. Because one thing you got to understand, technology is what locks down your DNA. That's what you call light code lockdown, because technology is a cryogenic encryption. Technology is a cryogenic encryption that locks down the non-ether cells, which is sun, heat, genes, and granulations and prominences. And also, when you interface with technology, that basically subjugates your ability to see within the ethers. A lot of people cannot see because they're bounded by the frequencies of the magnetospheric holographic matrix that is made up of subatomic particles, right? It's kind, when you're talking about subatomic particles, just think of this thing on this guy's face. These subatomic particles, that's why you can only see, only 5% of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's because like these frequencies, these subatomic particles, they basically interfaces with you. They're cube shaped. It's another way to box you in spiritually. So now when you're boxed in spiritually, you won't be able to see these entities for who they are, because by way of human perception and emotional energy, they use it to bend the photon-like spectrum. So when you're talking about draconian reptilians, a lot of them look human, but you don't have the ability to see them because of the technology that interfaces with your DNA, that shuts down DNA, right? So a lot of these entities is going to start to show themselves because, like I said, the galactic center is the resurrection of the matriarch. And the resurrection of the matriarch is the divine feminine energy that puts the planet right back into its original balance. And when the planet's in balance, that makes you be energetically in balance to where you have the ability to, convert this energy of a neurological activation, which activates the neuroendocrine transducer. The neuroendocrine transducer is what gives you the ability to see beyond the illusion that's inside the matrix. That's how you circle the square according to the esoterics and Freemasonry. So James Goldstein, right, who is an Ashkenazi Jew, an Albion European, this guy right here, he is basically the gatekeeper warlock of the NBA. I'm going to say that again. So who he is to the NBA is who Michelle Lamy is to the hip hop industry, right? And a lot of these witches and warlocks that stem from the Canaanite bloodline and the Canaanite faction, the Amorites, the Tamahu, the Flugarides, these are basically the same bloodlines that's basically interfacing with the great majority of these draconian reptilians that live in the caverns of the earth. When you're talking about these subterranean kingdoms, lizard catacombs, that basically control the great majority of these earthquake devices. So Goldstein, he's seen at a lot of NBA games. You see him right here with LeBron James. And one thing you got to understand about James Goldstein, and mind you, he lives in LA. He lives in LA. He has a club called Sky Space in LA. And now when you go to the LA Times in 1934 on January 29th, they came out with a publication talking about the lizard people's catacomb city that's underground, right? This came out in the 1930s. So it is also, it's like, it's not like a coincidence. This is a known mythology in California that there's a underground lizard draconian catacombs underneath LA. And mind you, this guy right here, James Goldstein, the warlock of the NBA, he has a club called Club James or Club Sky Space above the horizon. It's a subterranean club that he has in LA, right? And mind you, when you look at certain names like Stein, when you look at the prefix of the word Stein, Stein is equated to stone. So you got Goldstein, Silverstein, Epstein. what's the guy, Weinstein. All these names in itself is connected to the Jewish faction. And why is that? Because when you get into the ancient Hebrew, Stein is equated to stone, right? So that means that the Steins in all these titles is a representation of BlackRock, right? And BlackRock is the center of their systems of control, which is also the veneration of Yaldabaoth, Yahweh, Enlil, Satan, the cube of Saturn. It's the same thing, right? So Stein and Stone is another way to subjugate the energy through the corporations. So that's why when you go to the coat of arms, you got the Goldstein. The Goldstein is also a branch of Vladimir the Impaler, of his bloodline, because that's connected to the Jewish dragons, which is the Jew witches. And the Jew witches, they come from the Order of the Dragon. The Order of the Dragon is a secret society that deals with draconian magic. And the draconian magic stems from Count Dracula. Count Dracula, who is Vladimir the Impaler, who is the true Count Dracula. So that's why, you know, the great majority of all the elites on the planet, their bloodline is in harmony with his bloodline. So there's a bloodline connection. So that's why everything in the energy extraction matrix is based on what? Bloodshed. They get their energy from blood. We get ours from the sun. That's the difference. So what I was saying earlier, who James Goldstein is to the NBA, he is basically the Michelle Lammy of the NBA. He is basically who she is to the hip hop industry, right? So Michelle Lammy, just like what she does, she's basically the witch of the hip hop industry, but he's the warlock of the professional sports arena, this professional sports, right? He's a gatekeeper. Every industry has a gatekeeper. Every industry has a warlock, because like I said, the systems of control, which basically interfaces with Yahweh, Yaldabaoth, who is the god of the Canaanite, they created another 13 and created a 26, which basically inverted the energy of the true feminine energy of the 13. Everything is based on inversion. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about again. I'm going to blow it up so you can see it. So what I'm saying is everything as far as like what they do is it deals with the number 13, but they created an artificial structure that amalgamates with the number 13 that creates the number 26. The number 26 in the Tetragrammaton is what creates the gematria code for Yahweh, who is agreeable and disagreeable, who is Enlil, right? That's why God of the Bible is Yahweh, which is Satan. So Yahweh is the God of the Canaanites, right? Yahweh is the God of the Canaanites. But you also got to understand that according to the book of Leviticus, the Canaanites were the ones that was basically cursed with leprosy, a leprosy trait that basically disconnects them from nature. So if God of the Bible is Yahweh and you're the God of the Canaanite, that basically denotes the fact that you are Shaitan, right? So the Canaanites, these are nothing but Canaanites. Anybody who has these last names, Canaanite bloodline, right? You got to understand what's going on. So there's a reason why, you know, I'm going to show you this, you know what I'm saying? I don't know, bro. I'm sorry. I got to show you this because people be thinking that I'll be making these videos for no reason. There's a reason why I make videos like this, because I'm in connection with a lot of people who is in certain industries, who is in the NFL, who is in the NBA, who is in the music industry. I'm in connection with certain people. And when I put out certain information and videos, I'm talking to these people behind the scenes because they know what I'm talking about. I'm going to show you an example. I'm sorry, bro. If you're watching my YouTube channel, I just got to show it to the people because I want them to know that this shit is real. So after today, when I put out my video talking about James Goldstein being the warlock of the NBA, shout out to, like I said, if you're watching, shout out to Nate Robinson. He used to play for the Chicago Bulls. He played for the Knicks. You know, he had a, you know, a solid NBA career. He's actually one of the, you know, the top, you know, guards that's under, you know, 6 foot that, you know, ever played the game. So this guy, you know, Nate Robinson, he because we follow each other on Instagram, he said, bro, you don't be afraid of them coming for you, giving us this game. Because like I said, he already know what's going on. He's in, you know what I'm saying? When you reach when you start to when you end up in a certain tax bracket, you end up in certain rooms. You know what I'm saying? You end up in certain rooms and you hear certain conversations. So that's why, they in real time, bro, like they already know what time it is. So he used to play for the NBA, you know what I'm saying? Nate Robinson, salute to the guy. So he's one of the very few celebrities that follow me. Like I said, there's a lot of celebrities that follow me and they know what I'm talking about. So that's just proof in the pudding. So now we're going to get to the transliteration of the book of Revelation, Els Holy and Jill, that was created by Dr. York. Now, it tells you in this publication, it says right here verbatim, because of El Elyon El Theos, who made their hearts become the disease, making their nations give themselves unto the reptilian. And the evil reptilian is going to give their kingdom to the beast, right? So I need you to understand something. When you get deep into the esoterics of monotheistic religion that talks about jinns, it talks about demons, it talks about, shaitan. These are nothing but draconian reptilian entities. So the evil reptilian, right, are the same ultra-terrestrials that controls these industries that show up in human form, and they come back in human form, and they're basically warlocks of certain corporations and industries, right? So that's why a lot of times when you're talking about the evil reptilian gave their power to the beast, that is basically the draconian reptilian taking upon human form of the beast, right? They can take upon human form. That's why you can look at his face. He has those blotches on his face because when you miss a adrenochrome appointment, your face starts to look like this. Because adrenochrome in itself has the ability to resurrect the blood. It has the ability to resurrect the hemoglobin cellular structure to the point where it doesn't break down the cells intrinsically, to where it doesn't manipulate the epidermis layer of your skin, right? So that's why, like I said, and you go to transliteration, so the evil reptilian gave their power to the beast, right? And that's why I said the evil reptilian, who was Yahweh, Enlil, Yaldabaoth, Renfran, Moloch, Baal. That's the same evil reptilian who gave their power to the beast, who is the Canaanite. That's what you got to understand. But since their systems of control is starting to fall, this is the fall of the Canaanite. It's the fall of the Draconian bloodline, right? So that's why Dr. Yorkie also talks about this in the transliteration of the book of Revelation 17:18. The third entity of the evil reptilian triangle triad, the Jews, the Irish, and the Italians. The state of Israel headed by the Jew. Just like how the United States gives power to those who do its bidding, power will be now given to the state of Israel, and to the words of Theos are finished. Now, one thing, this is where they got the word. You see the word Theos right here. I'm going to show you. You see the word Theos. The word Theos, this is where you get the word Thanos from, right? Because Theos is the true personification of El Elyon El, which is the true personification of the Most High. Theos, because Theos is Thanos, and Theos is the true star Polaris that's outside the firmament. Because outside the firmament, when it cracks open in 2043, that is basically the galactic snapshot of Thanos. Is when the firmament breaking open. That is basically the great solar flash. That is basically the Phoenix event. That is basically where you see the three-dimensional world dissipate into nothingness. That's what that's basically talking about. So when you're talking about Thanos, you're talking about Theos, because Thanos was actually the embodiment of the Most High, who basically eliminated, the three-dimensional world. So that's why I said the evil reptilian triangle, the Jews, the Irish, and the Italians, right? Remember, the Steins, right? The evil reptilian gave power to the beast. The beast is the Canaanite. The Canaanite is the Jew. The warlocks who control these industries, right? That has these names right here. All right, and then we got one more slide. And then when you go to Revelations 18:2 and 3 in El's Holy Injil. And he cried with a great voice saying, Babylon, the big is fallen. Babylon, the big is fallen. The time has now come for the demise of the Babylonian fourth empire of the evil reptilian to come to an end like all others. And America has become the dwelling place of demons, home for the physical malevolent beings, and the prison of every unclean, unholy demon and hated bird, taking symbol of the eagle of the nature vulture because of its powerful and it kills. So, like I said, this is basically telling you in real time that, Enlil, a draconian reptilian, Pindar, Moloch, is the one who is basically the god of this world, the god of the demiurge, because we live in a prison planet, right? So, with that being said, we're gonna get to some Q&A. We're gonna get to some Q&A. So for those coming in, if you new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. They demonetize my page because I be talking that shit, and we still gonna put out the information regardless, whether if I'm monetized, demonetized. Like I said, but it's nothing to me because, like I said, I got skills. Look, let me show you something. We're gonna talk. Like I said, it don't matter to me. You know what I'm saying? You can demonetize my page. I got skills. Like I said, I have an engineering background. So it's not for me to go right back to that if need be. So so it was one of those things where like I said, bro, like there's a lot of pages, what I'm saying, conspiracy pages that talk about UFOs and history. There's a lot of pages that talk about the same information. I might go a little deeper than other pages, but why are you bothering my page? Why out of everybody's pages that talks about information and knowledge, why bother my page? Why my page? Right? If I wasn't speaking the truth, if I was an agent, why are you bothering my page? Right? And salute to Baba, Dr. Alim Bey. He told me this 4 months ago on the telephone. For those who familiar with Dr. Alim Bey, he's a venerated orator, and he speaks about metaphysics, quantum physics. He goes real deep into esoteric knowledge. He's an elder, and he told me on the phone. Me and him, we had like a conversation. We was on the phone for about good 4 hours, exchanging information, sharing knowledge. You know what I'm saying? Because man sharper man, like how steel sharpens steel. We was on the phone exchanging information, and he told me verbatim. He said, when you start to hit like 100,000 on your YouTube, he said that's when they're gonna come after you. He told me, he said that he remembered that he had a conversation with young Pharaoh at one time, and he said that they, he said that they're gonna come for you. They're gonna start bothering you when you hit about 100,000. They're gonna start to demonetize you and all this other stuff. So it's a part of the prophecy. Anybody, what I'm saying, who call themselves, being a truth speaker, it comes with it. It comes with it. It comes with it. So salute to Dr. Alim Bey, and salute to who also told me about the coming of these implications. Dane Calloway. Dane Calloway also, he told me about how when you hit 100,000, they're gonna come for you, and so they're gonna try to compromise your message, or they're gonna come. And he's also said that there is another side of it too, because if they see that you're able to still put out information while you're not without being demonetized and backed by advertisers and stuff like that, he said then that's when they're going to try to spin the block and try to give you deals, right? Because they can see that you have the ability, what I'm saying, to extrapolate knowledge to different demographics of people, whether if I'm trying to reach older people or younger people. Hold on for a second. Am I blurry on you guys' screen? Let me know in the chat. Am I real blurry? Am I blurry on the screen? So yeah, they definitely, because y'all never know. Like, see, my stuff is never like this, never. Most of the time when I come on here, my shit be clear. Like I said, man, they trying to compromise. Let me see. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, but I'm gonna get to some questions. Well, I guess it's yeah, it's blurry on some people's end. It's blurry on other people's ends too, or some people got a clear image. But anyhow, put some questions in the chat. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of stuff they trying to do. They trying to sabotage my page, bro. Cause like I said, I don't break no rules. I have no strikes. I have no violations. So now, you know, like I said, they're trying to compromise my algorithm. They're trying to compromise the picture on my screen to basically deter people from leaving my lives because it looks blurry. So we already know what time it is, man. That's how you know this shit is real. That's how you know. But I ain't getting no questions, you know. I'm just letting you guys know what's going on. I wanted to give you guys a head up about what's going on, what they doing to the channel and things of that nature. And make sure y'all stay up to date on my social medias. That way I know when I'm come back with another live or whatever. So I appreciate you guys for watching. And like I said, I'm also going to be doing some other videos where I'm going to do random uploads once a week. And I'm going to do like it's going to be based on the current events that's going to be taking place. And it's going to be like maybe like a 20 to 15 minute video. And it's basically just going to be something to lay the foundation right before I get into my lives and my presentations. So I'm also going to incorporate that. So so with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching this video. End of transmission.